More passionate about fisheries management, but I'm going to do my best to keep it very brief. I just want to sort of give you I want to give you a context of why these scallops are so different. And you need to understand a little bit about fisheries management in order to do that. That's because in the United States, the states have the authority to manage fisheries from the shore out to 3 miles. From 3 miles out to the edge of the exclusive economic zone, the feds can manage. So, oh, someone's just entering. So in Maine, we have out to 3 miles, and then beyond that, it's the federal government that manages fisheries, not just for scallops. This is for all fisheries. Now, I mentioned that the federal government can manage out to the edge of the exclusive economic zone. That's usually 200 miles, but in the Gulf of Maine, Nova Scotia comes down. So the further down east you get, you'll notice that there aren't really 200 miles. Well, there's not 400 miles between Canada and the United States. So when the Law of the Sea Convention said, okay, each country can have jurisdiction over 200 miles, they had to negotiate a settlement between the United States and Canada in the Gulf of Maine. And the folks that negotiated that settlement weren't very thorough, as is often happens. Down East got forgotten. And so you can see there's a little, oops. There is an area there called the gray zone. Gray zone. It's a little ovoid. Canada claims it, and the United States claim it, and much to the chagrin of both fishermen, because especially lobster fishermen complain. The Americans are like, the Canadians are taking our lobsters, and the Canadians say the Yankees are taking our lobsters. So it's just an interesting thing, and you hear lots of lobstermen complaining about the gray zone on a regular basis. Speaking of lobster. You need to understand in the state of Maine, lobster is king when it comes to fisheries. And an indicator of that is when I began working as a fisheries manager for the Maine Department of Marine Resources, there were two fisheries managers there, resource management coordinators, one for lobster and one for everything else. And I was the everything else. And my boss at the time said, well, you know, Togue, there's way too much to do. But the good thing about that is you can choose what you want to focus on. And I focused on scallops because the fishery for many years had been kind of passively managed, and the majority of the regulations in place weren't there for the benefit of the scallop resource. They were actually there to prevent gear conflict with the lobster fishery. And I had seen in the federal fishery some measures, especially closed areas, were put in place to benefit the groundfish industry. They didn't benefit groundfish. Groundfish is still in the toilet, but they did amazing things for scallops. If you leave scallops on the seafloor, they will grow. And so that was something in the back of my mind that I thought might work. I was one of many people that worked to help create some more sensible regulations in the state of Maine. I have to gloss over this because this is not the point of tonight's conversation, but a number of us worked, had some very controversial meetings, and ended up making some dramatic changes to the way Maine manages its scallop fishery. It is now far more sustainable than it was before we did that, much larger. Long story, I won't get into all those details. But right now, we're talking about Maine scallop fishery. You need to know that our Maine boats produce roughly 2% of U.S. sea scallops. So of all the scallops that come in the United States, the sea scallops, Maine's inshore fishery produces about 2%. They have to stay within 3 miles of shore because it's a state fishery. The fishery opens December 1st. This is for draggers, December 1st, and goes to the end of March. The guys can only catch either 95 or 135 pounds per trip, either 2 or 3 5-gallon buckets. There's another small fishery where they can catch 200 pounds. That's why it's just 95 to 200 pounds there. But either way, they're catching a very small amount of scallops compared to what comes in from the federal fishery. They store their scallops in cloth bags buried in, excuse me, they store their scallops in 5-gallon buckets on deck. They fish only in winter. So these scallops never come into contact with water or additives. Now, this is what's going on right now. That catch limit that I mentioned is something that was put in place while I was at DMR. And at one of the meetings, we were debating lowering the limit from 200 to 135 pounds. And one of the fishermen said, you know, Togue, I wouldn't mind lowering the catch limit if I knew what I was going to get paid for my scallops, but I never know what price I'm going to get. And I had this Oprah aha moment of, why is that? And to understand my indignation, you need to understand just what the federal fishery is about. So in the United States, 93% of the scallops that come in the United States that are caught in the United States waters come from large boats at sea for a week or more at a time. They store their scallops in cloth bags buried in ice. Over the course of the trip, that ice melts and the scallops absorb it. That dilutes the flavor of the scallop and it also adds weight. And because the fishermen are paid by the pound, they're certainly not going to do anything to discourage that. So this is why at that meeting I was like, why is Morris Alley, who's coming in with 90 pounds of scallops he caught 4 hours ago, being paid a price set by the federal fishery? It makes no sense. It's like taking well, I mentioned that the lobster fishery dominates. The majority of the dealers down east, which is where most of the scallops come in, they were buying Maine scallops, few coming in at a time, stockpiling them, and then shipping them out of state, trucking them out of state to be mixed in with the stuff from the federal fishery. And that is like taking a bottle of Dom Perignon and pouring it into a vat of Barefoot Bubbly. It doesn't make any sense, but that's what was happening. And I tried to get a dealer to focus on Maine Dayboat scallops. Nobody would do it. So in the end, I ended up quitting my job at state government and founding Down East Dayboat. Now you know about Down East Dayboat. You've purchased them, or you wouldn't be here right now. My original premise for doing this is, well, I want Maine fishermen to get a premium price for their premium scallops, and I want to showcase these amazingly fresh scallops. But I soon learned there's more to just the freshness of the scallops. There are different varieties. There was a woman, Ingrid Bengus, out of Stonington, Maine, who supplied some really great restaurants with a number of different Maine seafoods. And she said that Stonington scallops tasted different than scallops from elsewhere. And I remember thinking, she must be crazy. There's no way that you could tell a difference between scallops of different areas. But the more scallops I started purchasing and consuming, I realized she was right. Now, on the right there, you see the flavor wheel. There's a flavor wheel for oysters because people understand that oysters taste different depending on where they grow. So it would make sense that scallops are the same thing. And I wanted to look into why are there so many different varieties of scallops in Maine? So I'm going to get into a little geology here. So Maine's coast is a very complex coast. The bedrock along the coast was shaped by a series of collisions, mostly about 400 million years ago. I don't know how familiar you all are with plate tectonics, but imagine a bowling ball and rub Vaseline all over it, and then take a bunch of lasagna noodles and plop them around. Those are like the continental plates. They're moving around. Now, imagine two of those lasagna noodles are adolescent boys that want to play chicken with their souped up cars. So they are coming towards each other fast, they hit, and they buckle up. That creates mountains. Or maybe they come and one of them does actually chicken out and goes to the side. It folds over. That's what's happened along the coast of Maine for, well, mostly 420 to, well, 360 to 500 million years ago. And there have been successive collisions. So there are these collisions that are happening. Then sometimes one plate will go under the other one, that it warms up, you get volcanoes. All of these things impacted the shape of the coast of Maine. And I have to give a shout out to Joe Kelly, my coastal geology professor from my master's program, who provided me with some of these slides. You can see this bedrock geology map of Maine, and I don't know if you can see behind me, but it is very complex. We had continents that came together, pulled apart, volcanoes. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this as we go on. Very exciting. There's a fault there, the Norumbega Fault. Okay. So when you look at the coast of Maine, it can be divided into four areas. Looking at this, the arcuate embayments, indented shoreline, the island bay coast, and the cliffed coast. So arcuate embayments, that's the southern portion of the state. There you have these granite headlands, and in between them, metamorphic rock. That metamorphic rock erodes more quickly, so it erodes away, and you get beaches, sand beaches and marshes in between granite headlands. And there's a great example of that right there. We're not going to talk about that too much because there aren't a lot of scallops there. You go north a little bit. I know there are a lot of folks here that heard about this experience through Eat, Drink, Lucky, so you're probably from somewhere around Casco Bay. This is the indented shoreline, and what you want to pay attention to here is the orientation of the bedrock. There was a bunch of faulting. So in Casco Bay here, the orientation is northeast-southwest. That means when the storms come in, there's a lot of wave action. So you don't get mud. You get sand and you get eroded rock, as in Cape Elizabeth. When you go a little bit further east, you have a north-south orientation, which that means you get these long bays that are protected from wave action. So you get marshes and mudflats. This is where you'll get the Damariscotta River that's famous for oysters. You go a little bit further down east and you get the Island Bay coast. So all the blue that's there on the bedrock geologic map, that's granite. Very resistant to erosion. And so the other area, the metamorphic rocks around it eroded. You get these islands. Some of these, Mount Desert and Isle Haute, were igneous intrusions. There were volcanoes. Some of the largest volcanoes ever to occur on Earth happened in this area, which I find very fascinating. Another thing that I want to actually meant to say before we get here, in the indented shoreline around Rockland, we have it's called a limestone quarry. It's actually marble. Limestone and marble have to come from a more tropical clime. It's from, shallow seas, shallow tropical seas generally is where you get the limestone. But there was a microcontinent, Abylonia, that collided into and stuck to the area around Rockland, got metamorphosed into marble. That's why we have that there. So we've done the Island Bay coast. Last but not least, we're getting up to the cliffed shoreline. This is really interesting. This is where we get quite a few scallops. There's an area here, you had a number of faults. There is a rock here, diabase, which has the same mineral composition as basalt, but it's got these fractures in it, so that when it erodes, it doesn't erode a little bit at a time slowly. It just sort of sloughs off in big sheets. So this is a picture of the bold coast, and it truly is bold. There is nothing between Mother Nature's temper tantrums and the bold coast. So it's very difficult. You guys only fish there on really good days, which is very different from Cobscook Bay, which is at the very far eastern edge. That has a lot of different activity. Imagine if you took a piece of paper and folded it and shoved it into the earth. That's how Joe Kelly describes it. But a lot of that area has been eroded. And prior to the changes that we made at DMR to scallop regulations, 85% of the scallops from the state of Maine came from that tiny little bay. That's because the resource was so depleted in other areas, and Cobscook Bay had actually put things into place to protect their resource. Get the bold coast there. So those are the physical things that give rise to the shape of Maine's coast. And Maine is the only state in the country that has an inshore population of scallops significant enough to support a real fishery. So we're the only place where in the States where you can have these little microclimates. Now, that's the physical portion of it, but also currents differ. If you look at this map here, the eastern Maine coastal current creates one gyre that is down east, and then the western Maine coastal current is very different. So there's a big difference between the scallops in the western part of the state and the eastern part of the state. And if you look down to the south, Georges Bank, there's a gyre there. That's where the vast majority of U.S. sea scallops come from. Oops, and let's see. So that is the currents, and we've also talked about the geology. Imagine also, Maine is the most heavily forested state in the country. That's 89% of our state is covered in forests. So when the rivers flow through those forests and those blueberry barrens, they're dumping, pretty clean water into the bays. So we've got these little microclimates that happen because of our jagged coast that create these areas with different food in them, different mineralities, different plankton happening. All of these things go on to create a different flavor in the scallop, because a filter feeder like an oyster or a scallop takes everything it's ever going to be from the water around it. So of course they taste different depending on where they are. And another thing that I find fascinating, but of course I'm a scallop nerd, is that there's a woman that did her PhD dissertation on genetic differentiation in scallops along the coast of Maine. And she looked at scallops from Georges Bank, Penobscot Bay, Casco Bay, Gouldsboro Bay, and Cobscook Bay, and all of them shared genetic markers except Gouldsboro Bay. Gouldsboro Bay, let's see if I can, no, I can't enlarge this to show you, but it's a long, narrow bay in down East Maine. And because, as if you remember that photo that Dana showed you, actually I'll go up there. There are males and females, they're broadcast spawners. So when they're really ripe and ready, That roe sac and that sperm sac can be as large as the adductor muscle itself, and they just put them out into the water column and they mix. So imagine if there are sperm and eggs on George's bank. I'm trying to get down there slowly, almost there. Okay, George's bank. I mean, they're all mixing together. But when you're in these little bays in Maine, there's less mixing. And so uh, there are areas that are very distinct, not just because of what they're eating, but because of the genetics, as in Gouldsboro Bay. So that, in a nutshell, or a scallop shell, is what can give rise to different flavors. So I can see, yes, you are making history. Yeah, this is we are hoping to have this published in a scientific journal as well as trade journals. And I would love all of your help. Please tell people about this. I mean, I have been on a mission for years now to show people what scallops should be. I knew that Maine scallops were fresher, they didn't have the added water, but I didn't realize just how unique they were
Mhm.
until I started buying them from different areas. And then when I went across country and started eating the scallops in other areas, I was like, oh my God, these are terrible. Like there are a lot of people in this country eating really bad seafood, and it doesn't have to be that way. And I don't have a big budget for advertising, so word of mouth is really what it needs to be. So please tell all your friends how delicious these are. How much do scallops move around, or do they migrate at all in a lifetime? David, yes, actually. So Dana just posted, and then I shared on Facebook a video of scallops actually swimming. So scallops do swim. That's why. So the adductor muscle is so big in scallops because they actually work with jet propulsion to move through the water, especially when they're young. If you have a bunch of baby scallops, juvenile scallops in a 5-gallon bucket, they are swimming all over the place. The smaller they are, the more they move. Talk about fishing techniques, dragging versus diving. I would love to. Dredging is not nearly as bad as people think that it is. The Gulf of Maine is a very high energy environment. The top 6 centimeters are overturned regularly due to storms and tides. And the areas that scallops live in are in high energy environments. They're not going to be living in deep sea coral beds. So these areas are used to being overturned. Also, dredges nowadays, with the price of diesel the way it is, these guys don't want to dredge up a lot of the bottom because that makes them use more fuel. So they do, I'm not going to say they tickle the seafloor, but they don't dig in that much. And the problem, I would say, with diver scallops is the vast majority of what's called a diver scallop is not actually a diver scallop. In the 1980s and 90s, well, 90s, Rod Mitchell from Brown Trading really made, and Bill, if you're listening, you can talk about this as well. You know probably more about this than I do. Made a name for diver scallops, which were at that time these fishery was just really growing. The urchin fishery had collapsed. A lot of guys that had been fishing for urchins switched to scallops, and they were going after the large scallops. And so these large scallops from Maine's inshore fishery were very, very tasty because they're from Maine waters. Not because they were dove for, but because they were from Maine waters. They didn't have grit in them, and they were better than the trip boat soaked scallops. But unfortunately, after the federal fishery recovered and you got a lot more large scallops in the federal fishery, unscrupulous dealers realized that they could just label large scallops diver scallops and get more money for them. So in the United States, Maine produces 2% of US sea scallops. In Maine, 5% of those roughly are diver scallops. And Marsden Brewer just joined us. What would you consider the best scallops? Well, I want to wait for a few more people to join us to finish their survey before I tell you what I think is the best scallop. But one of them would be Marsden scallops. Marsden, I am going to share my screen so I can bring up, I'm going to pin you. Let's see if I can do that. Add pin. All right. Hey, Marsden.
Hey, Toad, how you doing?
Pretty good, thanks. And I'm going to share this screen view slideshow.
Do you mind if I talk about that picture that you're about to show of the quote dredge?
Is it? Yeah, absolutely. Let me just go. Let me go back to that, and then I will get to. Whoops. Go ahead, Bill.
All right. So what you're looking at is unfortunately called a dredge. It's not meant to dig in. It's meant to scrape the scallops or lift them off the bottom. So the middle part of it, you can see like a square lattice. Those are basically turtle excluders. And the thing that fishes is there's a chain that goes from either end of the frame, which is the thing on top, and swings down around the bag in sort of like a U shape. That's what does the fishing. That frame on top does not dig in. You see those come up off the bottom, they're always rusty. If they were digging in, they'd be shined up. And
Hmm.
if you look on either side of the frame, top part, left and right, you can see that the steel is a little shiny there. That's what impacts the bottom, and the chain impacts the bottom. But if those dig in all the time, then you're coming up with a bag full of mud and rocks,
Yep.
and they're very clean when they come up. They catch pretty much scallops and a few other things. Thanks for letting me talk.
Oh, sure, of course. And Marsden, if you Marsden, you grow scallops, but you also drag for scallops. So let me just put this in here, view slideshow, and go to yeah, the end. All right. Marsden, go ahead and tell us a little bit about what it is that you do growing scallops in Stonington, Maine.
Okay, what we do is we grow them on underwater long lines, and the line is suspended down 20 feet in the water. It's actually weighted on the bottom and held up by balls that are down 20 feet underwater. If the balls were on top, the scallops would get seasick and die. They do. When we get a storm and we got stuff on the float, we definitely notice it.
So is
Uh,
that because they move around too much? They're dying because they're too close to there's too much turbulence?
yeah, just the going up and down.
Hmm.
They don't take it well at all. It don't take much to stress out a scallop.
Hmm.
Uh, Sebastian will tell you real quick they're the most tricky species to grow. Uh, it works for us because we don't have them out of water any more than 10 minutes at a time. If you have them out for half an hour, you're probably gonna have some mortality. Um, but it's worth it. The chefs love them. Market, you can only grow it as far as you can provide it. So it's been a little slow doing that. What was getting the biotoxin stuff straightened out, but now we're looking good, and it's all systems go.
Now
The
tell us about you talked the other day about the mantle, how the Japanese folks didn't go straight for the adductor muscle, they went for the mantle. And I know that when we were doing some cooking experiments, we took the mantle and we made it into calamari, which was the best fried seafood I had ever had was fried scallop mantle. But tell us about that experience, Marsden.
Yeah, we've had the Japanese fishermen over, a few of them, looking over what we was doing and everything, giving pointers with the Japan Amori, uh, you know, Maine Amori relationship. And when you open a scallop up for them to try it, uh, first thing they'll do is try the mantle. It's a little nuttier, a little chewier, but then after that they'll eat the adductor muscle. So it's different cultures, different ways of doing things, I guess.
And you also mentioned that some of the chefs commented, so you can provide whole live scallops to folks across the country. Now I have provided those. I offered them a few times last year, and they can be a little bit intimidating if you're not used to them. You need to remove the digestive tract. Um, we all want to get people more excited about this because as you can attest, it takes a long time to grow scallops from little baby spat that you collect yourself in the spat bags all the way to the live scallop. And so rather than being able to sell just the adductor muscle, you want to be able to sell the whole thing. Unlike other bivalves that when they filter feed, they get those toxins in, and when the dinoflagellates leave the area, they purge it from their system. Scallops can actually at times retain it for months after those toxic algae are in the area. And so, in an abundance of caution for a long time, we weren't able to sell whole scallops in Maine. But Marsden fought for years, decades even, to get this up and running. And it's been a very big uphill battle, but he's really the one that worked to make it happen. And right now, there aren't a ton being produced, but there are some being produced and they're super tasty. The area that Marsden actually fishes in produces some of the best tasting scallops anywhere. I mentioned Ingrid Bengus, and she said that a Stonington scallop is the best scallop around. That's where he's fishing is that area. So this is Madam Scientist here. Anne is not, I haven't introduced her. So she is the director of the Sensory Studies Institute. And maybe you should tell exactly what you are. Oh, look at this. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Hello, everyone. And yeah, from Portland, Oregon, so the other side of the country. And I work at Oregon State University Food Innovation Center here in Portland and direct the Sensory and Consumer program. And we do testing like this on all different types of products, but really, really enjoy a project like this where we're trying to, show that there are real differences and why it matters to, coastal communities and our wonderful fishermen. So anyways, I'm going to make sure that everybody, I want to hide this. There we go. And then there we go. So hopefully everyone can see the screen okay. We still have it looks like about 25 people that are testing, but a good majority of you did finish. And so these are partial results. They might change just a little bit, but we'll get those out to you. So this is what you all said in terms of the attributes that are in your ideal scallop prior to the tasting today. And this is not at all surprising. People want something that's sweet, fresh ocean, buttery, tender, smooth, delicate, briny, and large. And then the next question that we had was, how much do you like scallops? And I'm so happy to see that almost everybody said they either like them extremely or very much, because we want to test that. We want to make sure that we don't have people that really don't like scallops. This was your check all that apply after you did the tasting. And, sweet was still the most important.
That has changed unbelievably.
Yeah, there are some changes. It didn't categorize it in the same way. So
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I'm going to go back and do that. And we've got the data for all the 6 samples as well. But there are some attributes that were a little higher here than others, like mild flavor, which I'm actually really surprised about. Salty, seawater. We have smooth again, tender, delicate, etc. Supple was one. And then when we look at the samples and what you guys really liked, there are some similarities to the chefs, but there's actually also some differences. And
there's huge differences. There's no, my God.
Yeah. And so I don't know if Togue, if you want to talk about this, or I'm happy to.
Well, just that when we tested the chefs, there were 2 clear winners. And I'll show you where these come from, but the 2 clear winners for the chefs were Stellwagen Bank and Casco Bay. And here it looks like Casco Bay. I mean, Anne, you could probably interpret this better than I can. Now the results from the chefs were statistically significant. Are these, Anne? Like what do you see?
Some of them are different. I do see some differences, but we're going to have more differences when we get a larger sample size, because right now this is only partial.
Yep.
But interestingly, so that Stellwagen Bay is 804 for you guys for the decode, and the Casco Bay was 642. And pretty much across the board, those are the 2 samples that the chefs really preferred. But you all have some, like the Bold Coast, which I think that's
930.
Yeah, 930. You guys rated that really well in texture and firmness. And so it'll be interesting to see if those results hold steady, because that was a huge driver in liking, especially for the chefs.
This is interesting also, Anne, because these were, and just a spoiler alert, the chefs did not know if these were frozen or not. They had no idea. We asked them, and the majority thought they were fresh. Many of you understood before this that they were frozen because I mentioned they most likely were, but these were all defrosted on Tuesday, and flavors develop over time. So you had 2 more days of flavor developing than the chefs did. So that could be part of it.
Yep. And then we asked you about, the strength of the flavor, whether it was just about right, if, it was too weak or too strong. And so you can see that, about a third of you were saying that you wanted some more flavor there, but the majority said that the flavor strength was just about right. Very few people thought that they were too strong. And then in terms of the texture, that was even more ideal for people. It was funny enough, the Stellwagen Bank that actually was the one that people seemed to like the most in texture. Seemed like some people, a third of you, said that it was a bit on the soft side, but maybe that's just something that people enjoyed. So, quality across the board, you guys all thought that these had very good, high quality, so there's no differences there. But even more than the chefs, I
Oh my
think
God.
a lot of people thought these were fresh.
Yeah,
Very,
were.
very few people said definitely frozen.
Yeah, they were all frozen, guys. And I will show you if you do you have more? Is that your last slide?
No, I just have a couple more, but I
Okay,
can
good. Okay.
stop
Oh, no,
there.
no, please go. You keep going.
Yeah. We asked if, we thought that in general people would be interested in Merroir. 75% of you said yes, which
That's
is
a lot
great.
fewer than the chefs thought.
Yeah. And if you thought they were different, and yeah, a lot of you said you thought they were at least somewhat different, if not very to extremely different. And then we asked about, how different in flavor and texture were those you tasted today from scallops that you've tasted just generally. And people thought that these were even more different than what they've tasted prior. And the biggest differences, you said, were in flavor. So flavor differences were prominent, and probably for the reason that Togue just mentioned, followed by texture, aftertaste, and sweetness. And then could the average consumer tell a difference? It was kind of a third, a third, a third. Some people thought yes, some people thought no, some people weren't sure. And then finally, and obviously this was more geared toward the chefs, so that, would you consider purchasing live scallops? There's a number of you that said yes. And then barriers. So for chefs, the top barrier was cost, but I wanted to ask, there were a number of people that said other, and it would be interesting to understand what we didn't capture there. But the rest of these, I just wanted to show the well, I'll show you the age range was really great. We had people across the board, about half on gender, and then highly, highly educated audience here today. That is a number that we don't, over 50% advanced college degree. So yeah, it's just, these are really, really interesting results, but I would love to hear if anyone wants to unmute about what was the other that you all mentioned that was as a barrier?
Um, I,
In my case, it was simply the scallops that I'm purchasing now are so great. I don't need to incur any additional cost or work to improve upon what I already think is exquisite.
oh, Bobby, you made me blush.
So that's my other. And I'm a fisherman. I got enough to do. So if all I have to do is open a bag and I don't even cook them anymore. So I'm how much better can it get? So that was my other.
And if you could stop sharing, I'm going to share the chef results just to see if they're interested in that.
Yes.
So I answered other because I don't own a restaurant or a company.
That's
So
what I was thinking, is that because it
Yeah.
asked about purchasing for your restaurant, so that's probably why the
there should have been like an NA for that.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably why the results are skewed. But yeah.
Okay, so this is I want to show this view slideshow. Okay. This is where the areas were. So 573 was up here, Cobscook Bay. That's the really sheltered area. Bold Coast, 930. Now this is interesting. Bold Coast was the least favorite with the chefs, but that's not the case here. Mosquito Island, east side, that was 281. The Damariscotta River, Muscungus Bay was 435. Casco Bay was 642. Stellwagen Bank was 804, and I have to apologize to Bryce. Bryce did not get 281. He explained this to me, and I explained to him that there was one sack left, 281 at the end of the shipment, and I'm like, oh, the processing crew made too many, but unfortunately, no, he just didn't get it in his pack. So I'll get you covered. Don't worry, Bryce. But so this is where everything came from. And with with the chefs, the clear winner was Stellwagen Bank, which was not the case with you guys. Very different. The texture here, they like the Casco Bay texture. I'm not sure, Anne, if you see if what you think is the most significant here, but these were, yeah, chefs found that how different in flavor and texture were the scallops you tasted today from the scallops you've tasted prior. Between, mostly very different or somewhat different. This is what I loved though. The chefs thought for the most part that they were fresh and they weren't. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart because I try to, Maine scallop fishery is open from December through March. Now, if Marsden's industry grows, we'll be able to have scallops year round, and I hope that is the case. But for right now, in terms of the abundance of supply, you've got like 600,000 pounds of scallops coming in between December and March. It would be great if you could freeze those so that you could also have amazing quality scallops from April through November. That's what I'm trying to do. But a lot of chefs say, oh no, I would never serve frozen. Well, why would you serve an air quote fresh scallop from the trip boat fishery when you could be serving a frozen scallop from Maine? So that's what I'm trying to get across here. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if anybody wants to comment or ask questions of me or Anne or anybody else here.